My family framed me for insanity. I framed them for fraud. They say you should never sign a legal document without reading it, but they never tell you what to do when the notary is an undercover cop waiting for your signal. My son and his wife thought this was the final move in their plan to have me declared incompetent and steal my home. They had no idea it was the first move in mine to send them to prison. For 42 years, Eleanor's mind had been trained to find the single misplaced decimal, the subtle anomaly in a ledger that could unravel an entire corporate facade. Retirement had not dulled the instrument, only repurposed it. Her home on a quiet, tree-lined street was a testament to this precision. Every book on her shelves was ordered by author and publication year. Every spice jar in the pantry faced forward with its label perfectly centered, and the grandfather clock in the hall ticked with a rhythm she had personally calibrated to the atomic second. It was a closed system, a balanced equation of a life. Until the gift arrived. It sat on the solid oak mantelpiece, an unwelcome monolith of black plastic and glowing red numerals. A digital clock. Mark and Chloe had presented it to her the previous Sunday, a housewarming present for a house she'd lived in for 3 decades. Chloe's smile had been too bright, her insistence on finding the perfect spot for it too performative. "It has the date and the indoor temperature, Mom," Mark had said, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "Just so you can see everything at a glance." Eleanor saw everything at a glance, and what she saw was a violation. The clock was sleek, modern, and utterly alien against the warm wood and the framed photos of a life well lived. It displaced a small, porcelain bird her late husband had given her, now relegated to a side table like a demoted employee. For a week, Eleanor tried to ignore it. She told herself it was a clumsy but well-intentioned gesture from a son who had married into a world of sterile minimalism. But the auditor in her refused to be placated. An error, once spotted, could not be unseen. The angle was wrong. An object of its function should face the room's center for optimal viewing. This clock, however, was tilted almost imperceptibly downward, its glowing red eyes aimed not at the opposite wall, but at the worn leather armchair where she sat every evening to read. The power cord, too, was a source of irritation. It was thicker than necessary for a simple clock and snaked down the wall with an inelegance that offended her sense of order. She had tried to adjust its position, to straighten it, but Chloe had placed a tacky, adhesive hook to secure the cord, making its awkward placement a permanent fixture. On Saturday afternoon, as a sliver of sunlight cut through the living room window, Eleanor decided she'd had enough. She was dusting, a methodical ritual that allowed her mind to wander through its own ledgers. As she approached the mantelpiece, she did not reach for the clock itself, but for the porcelain bird. She held its cool, smooth weight in her palm and looked at the intruder that had taken its place. She ran her dust cloth over the clock's glossy surface, her movements slow and deliberate. Her fingers, sensitive from years of sifting through paper, traced the seams of the plastic casing. They were clean, almost too clean. Then the beam of sunlight shifted, glinting off the clock's face. It wasn't the red numerals that caught her eye, but a pinpoint of light from within the dark, mesh-like speaker grill on the front panel. Eleanor went still. The dust cloth remained pressed against the plastic. It was not a reflection. It was a tiny, perfectly circular piece of coated glass nestled deep within the plastic mesh, designed to be indistinguishable from the pattern. An auditor does not jump to conclusions. They gather data until a conclusion is the only logical outcome. She moved her head slightly to the left. The glint vanished. She moved it back to the right. The glint returned. It was a lens, an unblinking, silent observer in the heart of her sanctuary. The air in the room grew thin. The steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to mock her, each beat a measure of the time she had been watched. How long? Since Sunday? Or had there been other gifts, other Trojan horses she had welcomed into her home. The warmth she felt was not from the sun, but a flush of cold, sharp fury that started in her chest and spread to her fingertips. Her son. Her daughter-in-law. She did not smash the clock. She did not rip it from the wall. Her training, her very nature, dictated a different response. She carefully finished wiping its surface, leaving no fingerprints, and placed it back on the mantelpiece, ensuring its angle was precisely as she had found it. She looked at the photos next to it, her husband, young and smiling Mark as a boy on his first bicycle. The clock was watching her still, but now the observation was no longer one-sided. An audit had begun. The following Sunday, Eleanor drove to her son's house, a structure of glass and steel that seemed to have been surgically inserted into its manicured landscape. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of a chemical citrus. It was Chloe's domain, a gallery of beige furniture and abstract art so devoid of personality, it felt like a corporate lobby. Mark greeted her at the door with a kiss that landed somewhere between her cheek and her ear, his eyes fixed on a point over her shoulder. Chloe's brother, Julian, was already there, holding a glass of sparkling water. He was a man tailored in expensive fabrics, with a restless energy that made the minimalist room feel even smaller. His handshake was firm, his smile a well-rehearsed display of professional charm. "Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth. "Always a pleasure. You're looking fantastic." They sat down to a brunch of quinoa salad and grilled asparagus. The conversation began with innocuous topics: the weather, a local political race, Julian's recent trip to a ski resort. But as Mark meticulously arranged and rearranged the food on his plate, Julian pivoted. "I drove past your place the other day, Eleanor," he began, leaning forward with an air of casual interest. "That neighborhood has held its value remarkably well. Prime real estate." "It's a good home," Eleanor replied, taking a small bite of salad. She kept her posture straight, her napkin folded neatly in her lap. She felt the invisible weight of their collective gaze, an appraisal in progress. "But the upkeep?" Chloe chimed in, placing her fork down. Her concern was as manufactured as the centerpiece on the table. "All that yard work, the stairs, we just worry it's becoming a burden." Eleanor met her daughter-in-law's gaze. "I find physical activity invigorating. My roses have never been healthier." She offered no further information, leaving a void in the conversation that Mark rushed to fill by offering everyone more water. His hand trembled slightly as he poured. Julian took over again, his tone shifting from casual to advisory. "Of course, but from a purely financial perspective, a property that large is a significant liability. Taxes, insurance. Surprise repairs, you could cash out, move into a lovely new condo, and have a substantial nest egg to make life more comfortable." He gestured around the sterile room as if it were the pinnacle of aspirational living. "Simplify." It was an interrogation disguised as a family meal. Every question was a probe, every statement of concern a tool to gauge her perceived frailty. They were not asking about her well-being, they were auditing her life's assets. She was a line item, a variable in an equation he was trying to solve. Eleanor recognized the technique. It was the soft pressure applied before the squeeze, designed to make a person feel overwhelmed and eager for a simple solution. Their simple solution. "My finances are in excellent order, Julian," she stated, her voice even and clear. "My husband and I were always meticulous planners." This was a warning shot, a reminder of her professional background and cognitive fortitude. The statement hung in the air. Julian's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. Chloe glanced at Mark, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Mark simply stared at his plate, the picture of filial misery. He was a weak link, Eleanor realized, but one currently bound by loyalties she could no longer comprehend. The meal concluded with a strained silence. As Eleanor stood to leave, Chloe hugged her, a brittle, fleshless gesture. "We just want what's best for you," she whispered. Driving home, Eleanor's hands were steady on the wheel. They had revealed their strategy. They believed her to be a fading asset, a problem to be managed and liquidated. The predatory brunch had not yielded the data they sought, but it had given Eleanor everything she needed: a confirmation of their motives and a clear view of the battlefield ahead. On Tuesday afternoon, Sophia knocked on Eleanor's back door, a laptop tucked under her arm. She was the 17-year-old from next door, a girl with purple streaks in her dark hair and a mind that moved at the speed of light. For the past year, she had been Eleanor's paid, on-call tech support, patiently explaining the mysteries of software updates and cloud storage in exchange for $20 an hour and a plate of homemade cookies. "Everything okay, Mrs. Keene?" Sophia asked, stepping into the kitchen. "Your printer's not acting up again, is it?" "The printer is behaving, Sophia. Thank you for coming on such short notice," Eleanor said, gesturing toward the kitchen table. "I was hoping you could look at my Wi-Fi. It seems a bit sluggish today." It was a pretext, but a plausible one. Sophia set her laptop on the table and powered it on. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, opening diagnostic windows filled with lines of code that were as opaque as a foreign language to most, but as clear as a novel to her. She scanned the available networks, her brow furrowing slightly. "Okay, so here's your network. EK home signal strength looks fine," she murmured, more to herself than to Eleanor. "But that's weird." "What is it?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm, though her attention was laser-focused. Sophia pointed to a line on the screen. "This one. Nightingale Nest. It's an open network. No password. The signal is incredibly strong, like it's originating from right inside this house, but it's not coming from your router." Eleanor looked at the name. Nightingale Nest. The name was poetic and sinister, conjuring images of a hidden watcher, a bird in the eaves. "I've never seen that before. Is it a problem?" "An unsecured network is always a risk," Sophia explained, her focus still on the screen. "But this is different. It's broadcasting on a weird channel, almost like it's trying to hide. Most devices are set up to be simple. This one is intentionally configured to be discreet." She stood up, holding her laptop. "Let me just check something." Eleanor watched as the teenager walked slowly from the kitchen into the living room, her eyes glued to the signal strength meter on her screen. The bar graph fluctuated, dipping as she moved toward the front door, then climbing steadily as she turned toward the fireplace. "Whoa," Sophia said softly, stopping directly in front of the mantelpiece. She held the laptop up, pointing it at the new digital clock. The signal strength for Nightingale Nest was at maximum. "It's coming from here, or something right next to it." Eleanor felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. Her initial suspicion, born from a glint of light, now had a name and a signal. It was broadcasting its presence. "I've had a few new electronics recently," Eleanor said, her tone deliberately casual. She picked up the porcelain bird from the side table. "My son and his wife gave me that clock. And a new digital photo frame for the hallway." Sophia's eyes widened with understanding. She moved into the hallway toward the small table where the photo frame cycled through images of Mark's family. She held up her laptop. "Signal's strong here, too. Not as strong as the clock, but it's definitely another access point." She looked at Eleanor, the professional tech support demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "Mrs. Keene, these devices, they're not just a clock and a picture frame. They're running their own private, hidden Wi-Fi network inside your house. There's no legitimate reason for them to do that." Eleanor nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the glowing red numerals of the clock. The invisible web she had sensed had now been mapped. It was no longer a feeling, but a fact, displayed in the stark, clinical language of a signal strength meter. Her paranoia was not paranoia at all. It was an accurate assessment of a hostile environment. "Thank you, Sophia," Eleanor said, her voice betraying nothing of the icy resolve hardening within her. "That clarifies things perfectly. This is no longer a simple tech support issue, Sophia," Eleanor said the next afternoon, her hands folded on the kitchen table. The plate of cookies sat untouched between them. "What I'm about to ask of you goes beyond that. It involves investigating that hidden network. I need to know what it's for, where the data is going, and who is accessing it. I will pay you double your usual rate, but I must also be clear, this is a private investigation." "You can say no." Sophia looked from Eleanor's steady gaze to the laptop on the table. The curiosity and concern from the previous day had solidified into a protective loyalty. "They're spying on you, aren't they?" she asked, her voice quiet. "The clock, the frame, their cameras." "That is the hypothesis I'm currently auditing," Eleanor replied, her language precise. "I need verifiable data before I can reach a conclusion." For the next hour, the kitchen transformed into a digital forensics lab. Eleanor, armed with a legal pad and a pen, directed the inquiry with the same methodical rigor she once applied to a corporate balance sheet. First, map the network topology. What devices are connected? What are their IP addresses? Second, attempt to access the device interfaces. Manufacturers often use default administrative passwords. It's the digital equivalent of leaving a key under the mat. Sophia's fingers danced across the keys, her expression a mixture of concentration and awe at Eleanor's systematic approach. She isolated the clock as the network's primary node. As Eleanor predicted, the manufacturer's default password, admin1234, had not been changed. With a few clicks, Sophia was looking at the device's back-end interface. It was a file directory, stark and utilitarian. Inside were hundreds of video files, neatly labeled with dates and timestamps. The oldest was from the Sunday the clock was installed. They had been recording her for 10 days. Sophia opened one file at random. It was footage of Eleanor in her living room, reading in her armchair, the camera's perspective matching the downward angle of the clock on the mantelpiece. The audio was crisp enough to capture the rustle of a turning page and the distant chime of the grandfather clock. "They're high definition," Sophia whispered, horrified. Audio and video. Eleanor felt a wave of violation so profound, it was almost dizzying, but her face remained a mask of calm professionalism. "Check the file transfer logs. Is the data being stored locally, or is it being uploaded?" Sophia navigated to another tab. "It's streaming, to a cloud storage account. There's a log of all successful uploads. Now we look for anomalies," Eleanor instructed, her voice sharp. "Cross-reference the video timestamps with my known schedule. Were there recordings when I was out of the house? Look for file types that aren't video, audio-only files, text documents, anything that doesn't fit the pattern." For 20 minutes, they sifted through the data. Then Sophia stopped. "Here, there's an audio file, an MP3. It was uploaded from a different IP address, not from inside this house. The timestamp is from Monday, late at night." "Play it," Eleanor commanded. Sophia clicked the file. A moment of static, and then Chloe's voice, clear and cold. "He's getting sentimental. We need to push harder. The footage from this week is good, but it's not enough. Did you see her fumbling for her keys? We can loop that." Then Julian's voice, smooth and confident. "I'll have my guy edit the clips this weekend. We need a clean 2-minute reel of confusion. Make her look lost in her own home. The lawyer said a strong visual is more powerful than any doctor's note. By the time we file the petition, The judge will be watching a woman who can't be trusted to turn off a stove. Chloe spoke again. And Mark? Mark will do what he's told, Julian replied dismissively. He needs this deal to go through more than we do. Once he has the conservatorship, he signs the papers. The property is mine, his debt is cleared, and everyone gets what they want. The recording ended. The only sound in the kitchen was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Sophia stared at the screen, her face pale with shock. She looked at the kind woman who always had cookies waiting for her, who had been secretly recorded, judged, and sentenced by her own family. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her pen resting on the legal pad. She had written down 3 words: conservatorship, edited footage, property. The hypothesis was confirmed. The scope of the betrayal was documented. The cold, raw data on the screen was a declaration of war. They made a mistake, Eleanor said, her voice a low hum of focused intensity. She was no longer a grandmother in her sunlit kitchen, she was an auditor on the scent of fraud. They used a commercial cloud service. Commercial services require payment. Payment leaves a trail. Sophia, buoyed by Eleanor's unshakable composure, leaned back toward the keyboard. The account is registered under a generic email, but the billing info let me see if I can access the metadata. It was a digital breadcrumb, but it was enough. The monthly subscription for the cloud storage was being paid by a corporate credit card. The name on the card was not a person, but an entity, Apex Holdings, LLC. Apex Holdings, Eleanor repeated, writing the name on her legal pad and underlining it twice. Now we leave the digital world and enter the public record. Thank you, Sophia. You have given me a name. That is all I need. After Sophia left, with a backup of all the video and audio files secured on an encrypted hard drive, Eleanor moved from her kitchen to the small home office, where she still kept her professional-grade financial analysis software. For the first time in 5 years, she felt the old thrill of the hunt, the cold, clear-headed pursuit of a discrepancy. Apex Holdings, LLC was the thread she would pull to unravel their entire scheme. A quick search of the state's business registry confirmed Apex Holdings was a registered limited liability company. It had been formed 6 months ago. The listed agent was a boilerplate legal service in the state capital, a common tactic for obscuring true ownership. But the filing address for the company itself was a local P.O. box. Eleanor's mind worked through the next steps with practiced efficiency. She cross-referenced the P.O. box address with property tax records, lien filings, and court dockets. For 2 hours, she built a web of connections, each new piece of data a node in a growing network of deceit. The P.O. box was registered to another company, Ridgeline Development Group. This was not a shell corporation. This was Julian's primary real estate firm. The link was direct and unequivocal. He had used a thinly veiled cutout to pay for the surveillance on his own sister's mother. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. But Eleanor didn't stop there. An auditor knows that a single instance of fraud is rarely isolated. It is usually a symptom of a larger pathology. She began digging into Ridgeline Development's public filings. She found what she was looking for in the county court records: a string of recent lawsuits from unpaid contractors, a multi-million-dollar lien against a stalled commercial property, and 2 notices of default from a major lender. Julian wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. His real estate empire, which he and Chloe projected as a bastion of success, was crumbling. The acquisition of her property was not just a side project, it was a financial lifeline. He needed a high-value, unencumbered asset he could liquidate quickly to cover his massive debts. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of predatory financial desperation. This wasn't just about stealing from a family member, it was a frantic attempt to stave off his own ruin. He had conspired with his sister to defraud her own mother, using her husband as a pawn, because he was out of options. The knowledge was grim, but it was also a weapon. She now understood the full scope of their motivation, and in doing so, She understood their greatest vulnerability, their recklessness. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the screen in front of her glowing with the intricate, damning paper trail she had unearthed in a single afternoon. They thought they were dealing with an old woman. They had forgotten they were dealing with a forensic auditor. The next morning, Eleanor awoke with a chilling clarity. They wanted a performance she would give them one worthy of an award. The mantelpiece clock was no longer just a surveillance device, it was her audience. She purchased her primary prop online with overnight delivery, a simple ballpoint pen. It was unremarkable in every way, except for the tiny, nearly invisible lens positioned just above the pocket clip and a micro SD card port hidden under the screw-off casing. It was low-tech, reliable, and utterly discreet. This pen would become her witness, the unimpeachable narrator of her true state of mind. Her first performance began on Thursday. Dressed in her usual cardigan and slacks, she stood in front of the open refrigerator, the clock's camera capturing a perfect view of the kitchen. She held a carton of milk, stared at it for a long, vacant moment, then placed it not on the shelf, but in the bread box on the counter. She closed the refrigerator, turned, and walked out of the room with a mildly bewildered expression. She could almost hear Julian in an editing bay, gleefully clipping the footage. What their camera did not see was the camera pen, clipped to the neckline of her cardigan. Its lens recorded the truth after walking out of their frame. She immediately returned to the bread box, retrieved the milk, and placed it correctly in the refrigerator door. She then held up a copy of that day's newspaper to the pen's lens, the date clearly visible, establishing a timestamp that would directly contradict their fabricated timeline. She became a method actor in the theater of her own home. For their cameras, she would wander into a room and seem to forget why she was there, her face a carefully crafted mask of confusion. For her own camera, she would then immediately sit down and complete the New York Times crossword puzzle in ink, narrating her answers in a low, clear voice. They recorded her struggling to operate the television remote, jabbing at the buttons with apparent frustration. Her pen recorded her 5 minutes later, expertly navigating her laptop's online banking portal to pay her bills, verbally confirming each transaction amount and payee. Each feigned lapse was a piece of bait, each secretly recorded moment of lucidity was a spring being coiled in the trap. She created 2 parallel narratives. Theirs was a story of a woman in steep decline, a collage of decontextualized moments designed to paint a picture of incompetence. Hers was a meticulous, time-stamped log of a sharp and capable mind, a counter-ledger that would expose their narrative as a deliberate and malicious fabrication. This dual existence was emotionally taxing. The act of pretending to be the feeble woman they wanted her to be was a profound violation of her own identity. There were moments, late at night, when the weight of her son's betrayal felt like a physical pressure on her chest. But the auditor in her, the part of her that thrived on order and truth, would always reassert control. This was not about suffering, it was about evidence, and she was building an airtight case, one performance at a time. A week later, Chloe arrived unannounced. She carried a leather portfolio and an expression of cloying solicitude. Mark was not with her. This was a task for the more ruthless of the pair. She found Eleanor in the living room, sitting in her armchair directly in the sightline of the mantelpiece clock. "Hi, Eleanor," Chloe said, her voice a pitch too high. "I was just passing by. Julian's accountant sent over some tax forms for you to look at. Just some routine filings to help streamline your estate." She placed a sheaf of papers on the coffee table. Eleanor picked them up, her movements deliberately slow, as if her hands were stiff. The camera pen was clipped to her pocket, its lens recording everything. She scanned the first page, her eyes gliding over the dense legal text. It took her less than 5 seconds to identify the document for what it was, a durable power of attorney, granting Mark sweeping, unconditional authority over her finances, her property, and her medical decisions. It was the legal key to the kingdom they intended to plunder. "Oh my," Eleanor said, affecting a tone of weary confusion. "This all looks so complicated, all this fine print." She let the papers fall into her lap, a perfect picture of an overwhelmed senior. "I don't know. It's just a formality," Chloe pressed, her smile unwavering. "It allows Mark to help you with the bills, to talk to the bank for you if you're not feeling up to it. It's a safety net. You can just sign right here." She pointed to the signature line with a manicured finger. This was the moment. They were moving from surveillance to action. Eleanor looked from the document to Chloe's eager face. This was where they expected her to either sign in a fog of confusion or refuse out of stubbornness, giving them more footage of an uncooperative, difficult elder. She would do neither. "A safety net," Eleanor repeated thoughtfully. "That sounds sensible. But for something this important, shouldn't it be official? My late husband always said legal papers should be notarized at the bank. They have notaries there, don't they?" Chloe's smile faltered for a beat. This was an unexpected complication, a deviation from the script. She had likely come prepared with her own notary, a co-conspirator who would rubber stamp the document without a second thought. "We can have a notary come here, Eleanor. It's no trouble," Chloe offered quickly. "No, no," Eleanor insisted, her tone a perfect blend of vague anxiety and a desire to be proper. "I'd feel better doing it at my own bank, with Mr. Henderson. He's known me for years." She folded the papers and placed them back on the table. "How about Thursday? I have an appointment near the bank anyway. You and Mark can meet me there around 2. She had done 3 crucial things. She had taken control of the timeline, delaying the signing and giving herself time to prepare. She had moved the venue from her compromised home to the neutral, secure, and camera-filled environment of a federal bank. Most importantly, she had invoked a specific trusted third party, her longtime bank manager, forcing them to either proceed with her plan or reveal their reluctance to have the document scrutinized by an impartial professional. Chloe was cornered. To refuse would be to admit the document was not what it seemed. She had no choice but to agree. "Of course, Eleanor. Whatever makes you most comfortable. Thursday at 2 it is." As Chloe walked out the front door, her triumphant demeanor had been replaced by a subtle tension in her shoulders. The trap had been baited. Now, it was time to bring in the professionals to help her spring it. The moment Chloe's car disappeared down the street, Eleanor went to her office and made a call. She did not dial 911. She did not call a friend. She called in a professional marker, a debt of mentorship owed for 15 years. David Chen answered on the second ring. He was now a partner at a prestigious downtown firm, a man whose expert testimony could sway multi-million-dollar fraud cases. But when he first started, he was a brilliant but green junior accountant whom Eleanor had taken under her wing, teaching him how to read the subtle language of a doctored ledger. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm with surprise and respect. "It's been too long. How are you?" "I have a situation, David," Eleanor said, forgoing pleasantries. "It's a matter of forensic analysis. I need an hour of your time." "My office. Tomorrow morning." David arrived at her home at 9 o'clock sharp, his professional curiosity piqued by the urgency in his former mentor's voice. Eleanor had the encrypted hard drive, the printouts of Julian's corporate filings, and the power of attorney document laid out on her dining room table with the precision of a military briefing. She started not with the videos, but with the paper trail. She walked him through the Shell Corporation, the defaulted loans, the clear financial motive. David listened, his expression shifting from polite interest to focused intensity. This was the language he understood, the cold, hard logic of numbers. Then she played the audio file. She watched as David's face hardened, the professional detachment giving way to a visceral, personal anger as he heard the plot to manipulate evidence and defraud his mentor. Finally, she showed him the split-screen comparison she and Sophia had prepared, a clip of her feigning confusion, juxtaposed with the time-stamped footage from her camera pin of her completing a complex Sudoku puzzle moments later. When it was all over, David sat back, silent for a long moment. He looked at the woman who had taught him that every number tells a story. "This is not just fraud, Eleanor," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "This is a criminal conspiracy. Illegal surveillance, forgery, attempted elder abuse. They have built a cage for you out of lies, and they have scheduled an appointment for me to walk into it on Thursday," Eleanor said calmly. "At my bank. They believe I am bringing a pin. I intend to bring a legal team." David nodded, his mind already shifting from analysis to action. "You don't just need an accountant. You need a shark. And I know exactly who to call." He pulled out his phone. "Her name is Maria Flores. She's a former state prosecutor who now runs her own firm specializing in complex fraud, particularly elder exploitation. She doesn't just win cases, she dismantles them. She will see this not as a family dispute, but as a racketeering case." 2 hours later, Maria Flores sat at the same dining room table. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a presence that radiated absolute confidence. She listened to the entire story without interruption, her gaze fixed on Eleanor. She reviewed the documents, watched the video evidence, and absorbed the intricate details of the conspiracy. When Eleanor finished, Maria looked at her, a glimmer of profound respect in her eyes. "Most victims of this kind of scheme come to me after the fact, when the money is gone and the damage is done. You, Mrs. Keene, have come to me with a fully prosecuted case file. You've not only identified the crime, you've preserved the evidence, established motive, and engineered a controlled environment for the final criminal act." She tapped the power of attorney document. "This is their fatal error. Asking you to sign this in a bank is the amateur move of a desperate man. We're not going to stop them on Thursday. We're going to let them walk right into a federal crime, on camera, in a building full of witnesses." A professional team was now in place. The auditor, the accountant, and the attorney. The balance of power had shifted. While Maria Flores began drafting legal strategies and David Chin compiled a formal financial workup of Julian's failing business, Eleanor tasked Sophia with one final, crucial piece of reconnaissance. "They have the raw footage," Eleanor explained over the phone, "but Julian mentioned having it edited. That edited version is the weapon they intend to use in court. It likely exists on that same cloud server." Find it. It was a more complex challenge. Accessing the raw files through the camera's weak security was one thing, penetrating the password-protected cloud account where the finished product was stored was another. But Sophia, armed with the corporate credit card information and billing address Eleanor had uncovered, had an entry point. Posing as a disgruntled employee from Apex Holdings, she engaged the cloud provider's customer service, weaving a convincing tale about a forgotten password and a desperate need to access critical project files. It was a masterful piece of social engineering, and it worked. Within an hour, she had reset the password and gained full access to the account. She called Eleanor immediately, her voice hushed with a mixture of triumph and dread. "I'm in, Mrs. Keene. There's a folder here. It's labeled Project Nightingale." Inside the folder was the master file for their conspiracy. It contained a dozen short video clips, each expertly edited. Sophia played one for Eleanor over the secure line. It showed Eleanor standing in her kitchen, staring blankly at a pot on the stove as water boiled over. The clip was less than 10 seconds long, ending abruptly. "I remember that day," Eleanor said calmly. "The phone rang just as the water started to boil. I turned the burner off and went to answer it. They edited out both the phone ringing and me turning off the stove, It was a perfect, malicious little piece of propaganda. But the videos were not the most damning discovery. At the bottom of the file list was a PDF document titled E-Keen Neurological Assessment. Sophia opened it. The document was a 2-page report on official-looking letterhead from a neurological clinic Eleanor had never heard of. It detailed a supposed cognitive evaluation, replete with clinical jargon, describing symptoms of memory loss, executive dysfunction, and spatiotemporal disorientation. The final diagnosis was blunt early-onset dementia with rapid progression. The report was signed by a Dr. Alistair Finch. A cold dread, more potent than any anger she had felt before, settled over Eleanor. This was not just manipulation, it was a profound ontological assault. They were attempting to rewrite the very nature of her mind, to codify their lies into a medical fact. Alistair Finch, Eleanor repeated, typing the name into a search engine. Her auditor's instincts took over, pushing back the emotional tide. There is no Dr. Finch at that clinic. Let's check the state medical board. The search results came up instantly. Dr. Alistair Finch was real. He had been a licensed neurologist, but his license had been permanently suspended 2 years ago for, among other things, insurance fraud and selling prescriptions. He was a disgraced doctor, a medical gun for hire, and his signature was the centerpiece of their case against her. They had not just edited footage, they had fabricated a medical reality. They had built a complete, multifaceted case, combining visual deception with a fraudulent professional diagnosis. This single document elevated their scheme from a desperate, familial cash grab to a calculated, high-level conspiracy to commit fraud. It was the keystone of their entire plan, and Sophia had just handed it to her. Eleanor immediately forwarded the forged medical report to Maria Flores, who recognized it as the linchpin of a sophisticated fraud case. While Maria began drafting affidavits and notifying the state medical board, David Chen was conducting his own deep dive, cross-referencing Julian's failing business with Mark's financial records. He was looking for evidence of collusion, a money trail that connected son to brother-in-law. What he found was far more disturbing. He called an emergency meeting at Mariah's downtown office. The mood was tense. Julian hasn't just been planning to acquire the property, David began, spreading several documents across the conference table. He's already taken preliminary steps to sell it. He pointed to a purchase and sale agreement. The seller was listed as the Keene Family Estate. The buyer was Apex Holdings, Julian's shell corporation. The sale price was nearly 40% below market value, a classic sign of a non-arm's-length transaction designed for a quick flip. But it was the signature on the seller's line that made Eleanor's blood run cold. It was Mark's signature, or a flawless imitation of it. This agreement is dated 3 weeks ago, David said, his voice grim. Before Chloe even presented you with the power of attorney, and there are others. Title search requests, preliminary zoning applications, all filed with the city planning department, all bearing what appears to be Mark's signature. Eleanor stared at the familiar loop and scrawl of her son's name. For 30 years, she had seen that signature on birthday cards, school permission slips, and loan applications. She knew its every nuance. This was an expert forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. The pressure was slightly off, the angle of the final letter a degree too sharp. My son is in debt, but he is not a forger, Eleanor stated, a certainty cutting through her shock. He would not have the skill, nor the nerve. Maria Flores leaned forward, her eyes narrowed as she connected the dots. The picture that emerged was darker and more complex than any of them had imagined. They're not just using Mark, Maria said, her voice sharp with realization. They're setting him up. Think about it. If this goes wrong, who is the obvious culprit? The financially desperate son with the power of attorney, whose signature is on every document. Julian and Chloe can claim he acted alone, that they knew nothing about the forgeries or the undervalued sale. They'll paint him as a desperate man who manipulated them and his confused mother to solve his own money problems. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They weren't just exploiting Mark's weakness, they were weaponizing it. They had built him a gilded cage, convincing him he was a partner in a necessary but unpleasant family matter, all while constructing a paper trail that would make him the sole scapegoat if their conspiracy imploded. He was not just an accomplice, he was the designated fall guy. The emotional weight of this revelation was immense. Eleanor looked at the forged signature, a symbol of a betrayal so profound it was almost unimaginable. Her son, her only child, was being systematically positioned for a fall by his own wife and her brother. He was a pawn in a game so ruthless he couldn't even see the board. This changed everything. It was no longer just about stopping a theft, it was about extricating her son from a trap he didn't even know he was in. EOT. This changes the entire legal landscape, Maria Flores said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence in the conference room. We are no longer just dealing with a conservatorship fraud. With the forgeries, the fraudulent medical report, and the Shell Corporation, this is a textbook case for the DA's Economic Crimes Unit. It's racketeering. She looked directly at Eleanor, her expression firm but compassionate. We have a choice. We can file a civil suit and freeze their assets, which will bog us down in court for years. Or we can take this entire package, gift-wrapped, to law enforcement and let them handle it. Given the evidence of an active, ongoing criminal enterprise, I strongly recommend the latter. Eleanor thought of Mark, caught in the gears of a machine he didn't understand. A criminal investigation would ensnare him just as surely as it would Chloe and Julian. But a civil suit wouldn't stop them. It would only slow them down. The only way to truly end this, and perhaps the only way to save her son from deeper ruin, was to let the full weight of the law descend. Proceed, Eleanor said, her voice unwavering. The next morning, Maria Flores met with Assistant District Attorney Chen, the head of the White-Collar Crime Division. She laid out the case with clinical precision, the illegal surveillance, the edited videos, the fraudulent medical assessment, the Shell Corporation, the forged sales documents. But the centerpiece of her presentation was Eleanor's counter-evidence, the time-stamped videos from the camera pen, which systematically dismantled their narrative of incompetence. The ADA, a veteran prosecutor accustomed to dry financial cases, was captivated. It was rare to see a conspiracy so malicious, but rarer still to see a target who had so thoroughly turned the tables on her perpetrators. The fact that the final criminal act, the coerced signing of the power of attorney, was scheduled to take place in 2 days was the final, compelling piece. They're walking into a trap of their own making, the ADA said, a slow smile spreading across his face. And your client, Mrs. Keene, said it for them. This is perfect. We're not just going to prosecute this, we're going to catch them in the act. The plan came together with startling speed. The DA's office, working with the city police department, agreed to orchestrate a sting operation. The bank was brought into the loop, and the manager, Mr. Henderson, readily agreed to cooperate. The signing would proceed exactly as Eleanor had proposed, but with a few crucial changes to the cast and setting. The meeting would be moved from the main floor to a private conference room, ostensibly for privacy. This room would be outfitted with police-operated audio and video surveillance. The notary would not be a bank employee, but an undercover detective from the Economic Crimes Unit, an expert in coaxing incriminating statements from suspects. Plainclothes officers would be positioned throughout the bank lobby, and a tactical team would be on standby just outside. Eleanor was briefed on her role. She was to continue her performance as a slightly confused, easily suggestible woman. Her primary task was to get Chloe and Julian to verbally confirm the purpose and scope of the document on the official recording, to state clearly that it would grant Mark the power to sell her home. This recorded statement would be the final, irrefutable evidence of their intent. The sting was set. Thursday at 2 o'clock would not be the culmination of their plan, but the end of it. On Thursday, Eleanor dressed with care. She chose a simple tweed suit, sensible shoes, and her late husband's watch. She looked every inch the respectable, slightly old-fashioned widow. She arrived at the bank 10 minutes early and was greeted by Mr. Henderson, whose professional calm was a reassuring anchor in the churning currents of the day. Chloe and Julian arrived at 2 o'clock, their faces radiating confident anticipation. Mark was not with them, a detail Eleanor noted with a pang of cold relief. They had grown arrogant enough to believe they no longer needed him as a prop. "Eleanor," Julian said, taking her arm in a gesture of false solicitude. "Ready to get this sorted?" Mr. Henderson led them not to his public-facing office, but down a quiet hallway to a secluded conference room. "More privacy here," he explained smoothly. The room was blandly corporate, with a large table, several chairs, and a discreetly placed ficus tree in the corner that likely concealed a camera. The notary was already waiting. She was a woman in her late 30s, with a pleasant, unassuming demeanor that belied her true identity as Detective Miller. They all sat down. Chloe placed the power of attorney document in the center of the table. "Now, Eleanor," Chloe began, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is just what we talked about. It lets Mark help you out." Eleanor picked up the papers, her hands trembling just enough to be convincing. "I'm still not sure I understand all this legal language," she said, looking at the undercover notary. "Could you explain it to me, dear? What exactly am I signing?" This was the opening gambit. Detective Miller, in her role as the notary, turned to Chloe and Julian. "Of course, before I can notarize a signature, I need to ensure the signer fully understands the document. Could you summarize the key provisions for your mother-in-law?" Julian, ever the smooth operator, leaned forward. "It's a standard durable power of attorney, Eleanor. It gives your son, Mark, the authority to act on your behalf in financial and medical matters. It's a safety net, pure and simple." "So, he could what? Pay my electric bill?" Eleanor asked, her voice small. "Exactly," Chloe said, seizing the opportunity to simplify. "He could manage your accounts, make sure everything is taken care of so you don't have to worry." Eleanor looked at the document again, then back at Julian. "It mentions property, my house. Does this mean he could sell my house?" This was the critical question. The room was silent for a beat. From the corner of her eye, Eleanor saw the detective's hand rest near the notary stamp. Her posture utterly relaxed. Julian's greed overrode his caution. He saw the finish line and couldn't resist striding across it. "Yes, it does give him that authority," he confirmed, his voice smooth as oil. "It allows him to manage all your assets, including the house. It's about creating liquidity, Eleanor, to ensure you have the best possible care in the future. We've already had a very generous offer on the property." Detective Miller interjected, her tone professionally placid. "So, to be clear for the record, the signee, Eleanor Keene, is granting her agent, Mark Keene, the full authority to sell her primary residence at his discretion?" "That is correct," Julian said, a hint of impatience in his voice. He wanted the signature. Chloe added, "It's what's best for her. The house is far too much for her to handle." They had taken the bait. They had stated their fraudulent intent, on camera, in a controlled environment, to an officer of the law. They had confirmed the purpose of the document was not to help her pay bills, but to seize and liquidate her largest asset. Eleanor gave a slow, wavering nod, as if finally resigning herself to the inevitable. "All right, if you think it's best." Detective Miller pushed the document toward her. "Please sign on the indicated line, Mrs. Keene." Eleanor picked up the pen. It was not her camera pen. It was a simple bank ballpoint. She looked at Chloe's triumphant smile and Julian's predatory gaze. The weight of the moment was immense, the culmination of weeks of planning and deception. Her heart ached for the son who was not there, the son who had been so thoroughly broken and manipulated by these two people. She lowered the pen to the paper. The nib of the pen made contact with the paper. It was the signal. Before Eleanor could form the first letter of her name, the conference room door swung open. Two men in sharp, dark suits stepped inside. They moved with a quiet, practiced authority that instantly altered the atmosphere in the room. They were not bank employees. "Julian Croft, Chloe Keene," the first detective said, his voice calm and devoid of emotion. "You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal surveillance, and attempted grand larceny." Chloe's triumphant smile dissolved into a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. Julian shot to his feet, his face a sudden canvas of rage and confusion. "What is this? Who the hell are you?" "We're the people you should have been worried about," the second detective replied dryly, producing a pair of handcuffs. As hands were cuffed behind backs and Miranda rights were recited in a monotone drone, the scene unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Detective Miller, no longer a mild-mannered notary, stood and identified herself, her badge now visible on her belt. Mr. Henderson stood by the door, his expression grimly professional. "You can't do this!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking. She looked at Eleanor, her eyes wild with betrayal. "She's confused. She doesn't know what she's doing." Eleanor met her daughter-in-law's gaze. She said nothing. Her face, no longer clouded by feigned bewilderment, was a study in cold, clear composure. In that silent exchange, Chloe understood. This was no accident. This was an execution. As the detectives led them out of the room, a third officer entered and spoke quietly to Detective Miller. The warrant on Croft's office was executed simultaneously. "They've secured everything: computers, servers, hard files, and we picked up the son. He was waiting in the car around the corner. Mark." The news landed like a physical blow. Eleanor had hoped, somehow, that he would have had the sense to stay away, to extricate himself at the last moment. But he had been there, a willing, waiting accomplice, unaware that he was also the designated scapegoat. Eleanor was escorted out a private rear exit by Mr. Henderson, shielding her from the commotion in the main lobby. She could hear the raised voices, the gasps of the bank's customers as Chloe and Julian were led through in handcuffs. The trap, so meticulously set, had been sprung. The entire conspiracy, a web of lies and manipulation that had been months in the making, had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes. Standing in the bright afternoon sun, Eleanor felt not a sense of victory, but a profound and hollow ache. She had protected her assets. She had exposed the criminals. But she had also just participated in the arrest of her own son. The ledger, for the first time in her life, felt impossibly, tragically unbalanced. Mark sat in a sterile interrogation room, the smell of stale coffee hanging in the air. For an hour, he had maintained a stoic, bewildered silence, repeating only that there had been a misunderstanding, that they were just trying to help his mother. He believed it. He clung to the narrative Chloe and Julian had so carefully constructed for him. Then, the assistant DA entered the room, accompanied by Detective Miller. They didn't ask questions. They presented evidence. First, they played the audio recording from the bank. Mark listened to his wife and brother-in-law calmly discussing the sale of his mother's house, confirming their intent to liquidate her assets. He paled, but his loyalty held. "They were just discussing options," he mumbled. "Contingencies. Next, they showed him the forged purchase and sale agreement, the one bearing the imitation of his signature. They placed a verified sample of his real signature next to it. "Our forensic expert identified 17 points of divergence," the DA said flatly. "It's an excellent forgery, but it's a forgery. Were you aware that Julian Croft was signing your name to legal documents 3 weeks ago?" Mark stared at the paper, his face a mask of dawning horror. "No, that's not possible." Finally, the DA played his trump card. "Your brother-in-law is a very careful planner, Mr. Keene. He created a clear paper trail. A financially struggling son, a mother showing signs of dementia, and a power of attorney that gives him access to everything. A son whose signature is on every fraudulent document. If this case had gone to trial based on their plan, you, and you alone, would be facing a 20-year sentence. They were going to let you take the entire fall. The carefully built edifice of denial and manipulated loyalty crumbled. The full scope of the deception hit Mark with the force of a physical impact. He saw it all, the constant whispers from Chloe about his mother's lapses, Julian's generous offers to help with his failing business, the way they had isolated him, feeding him a narrative of familial duty while using him as both a pawn and a shield. He hadn't been a partner, he had been a tool. His composure shattered. He slumped forward, his head in his hands, and a dry, racking sob escaped his lips. The confession that followed was not a trickle, but a flood. He told them everything. He detailed the collapse of his graphic design business, the mounting debts he had hidden from his mother out of shame. He explained how Julian had approached him not as a predator, but as a savior, offering to discreetly cover his losses in exchange for his help in managing Eleanor's estate. He recounted the conversations where Chloe had pointed out every minor instance of his mother's forgetfulness, misplacing her glasses, forgetting a neighbor's name, and framed them as symptoms of a terrifying decline. "They made me believe she was in danger," he choked out, the words laced with a grief so profound it was almost palpable. "They said she could burn the house down, that she was becoming a danger to herself. They said the conservatorship wasn't about the money. It was about protecting her, about protecting the family. I truly thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being a good son." He admitted to planting the clock, believing it was a simple security camera to keep an eye on her. He admitted to his silence at the brunch, to his complicity in a plan whose true nature he had been expertly shielded from. He was a man drowning in the realization that his weakness, his shame, and his love for his mother had been the very levers used to betray them all. The story broke the next morning. It had all the elements of a media sensation, a wealthy real estate developer, a meticulously planned conspiracy, secret video cameras, and a sharp-witted matriarch who had turned the tables on her own family. News vans camped out at the end of Eleanor's quiet street. Reporters called her house at all hours, their questions a relentless barrage of morbid curiosity. Eleanor ignored them all. She unplugged her landline and communicated with the outside world only through Maria Flores. Her home, once a stage for her performance of confusion, was now a fortress against the intrusion of public speculation. At their arraignment, Julian and Chloe were denied bail. The judge, citing the sophistication of the fraud and Julian's network of offshore accounts, deemed them significant flight risks. They were remanded to the county jail, their designer clothes and arrogant smirks replaced by orange jumpsuits and the flat, dazed expressions of people whose worlds have irrevocably collapsed. Mark's situation was more complex. Based on his full confession and his clear status as a manipulated, if willing, participant, the DA agreed to release him on his own recognizance. He was charged with being an accessory to conspiracy, a serious felony, but his cooperation had earned him a crucial measure of prosecutorial grace. He was now a witness for the state, against his own wife. He called Eleanor once, from his lawyer's office. His voice was a raw, broken thing, stripped of all its former confidence. Mom, I am so sorry. Eleanor listened to the static on the line, the vast, silent chasm that now separated them. The betrayal was a wound that was still too fresh, too deep, to be bridged by a simple apology. "The lawyers will handle everything, Mark," she said, her voice not unkind, but devoid of the maternal warmth he had taken for granted his entire life. "Just do what they tell you." She hung up before he could reply. The days that followed were a blur of legal preparations. Eleanor met with Maria and the DA, providing a formal, detailed statement. She handed over the camera pen, her meticulous notes, and every piece of evidence she and Sophia had gathered. Her role as an amateur investigator was over. She was now the state's key witness. Through it all, she maintained an almost supernatural composure. She compartmentalized her grief, filing it away like a problematic ledger that she would address at a later date. Her focus was on the case, on ensuring that the intricate structure of lies they had built was brought crashing down with the full force of the law. There was no room for emotional indulgence. Fortitude was a requirement. She saw Sophia, paying her a handsome bonus for her invaluable and courageous assistance. The teenager looked at Eleanor with a kind of awe. "You're like a superhero, Mrs. Keene." "No, Sophia," Eleanor corrected her gently. "I'm just an auditor." I balanced the books, but late at night, in the quiet of her meticulously ordered house, the silence was a heavy blanket. The clock was gone from the mantelpiece, leaving a pale rectangle on the dusty wood. The porcelain bird was back in its rightful place. But the house felt different, haunted by the knowledge of what had transpired within its walls. The profound sense of violation lingered. And in those quiet moments, the auditor would recede, and the mother would emerge, left to grapple with the devastating, irreconcilable truth of her son's betrayal. 6 months later, the legal battles were over. Faced with an insurmountable mountain of evidence, Julian and Chloe accepted plea deals. Julian, as the architect of the conspiracy, received a sentence of 7 to 10 years in state prison. Chloe received 5. Mark, in exchange for his testimony, was sentenced to 3 years of probation and mandatory financial counseling. The cases were closed, the criminals sentenced, the headlines faded, but for Eleanor, the final accounting was still incomplete. She sold the house. The structure that had once been her sanctuary had become a museum of a betrayal too profound to live with. She didn't sell to a developer who would tear it down, but to a young family whose noisy, joyful children reminded her of a time before the ledgers of her life had become so complicated. The sale, conducted at full market value, was finalized on a crisp autumn day. With her future secured, Eleanor's next transaction was one of gratitude and investment. She met Sophia at a small cafe downtown. The teenager, now a high school graduate with a full scholarship to study cybersecurity at a prestigious university, was bright-eyed and full of plans. Eleanor slid a bank check across the table. It was for a significant sum, enough to cover any expenses her scholarship didn't. "This isn't a gift, Sophia," Eleanor said, her voice warm. "It is payment for professional services rendered, but it is also an investment. The world needs more people like you, people who can see the patterns others miss." She had established an educational trust in Sophia's name, a formal recognition of the girl who had been her first and most crucial ally. The final entry in Eleanor's personal ledger took place a month later, in the brightly lit community room of a local senior center. About 30 people sat in folding chairs, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Eleanor stood at a small lectern, not as a victim, but as an expert. On the screen behind her was the title of her pro bono workshop, The Auditor's Guide to Protecting Your Assets. She didn't tell her story in a sensational way. She presented it as a case study. Using anonymized documents and redacted evidence from her own investigation, she walked them through the warning signs of financial exploitation. She explained shell corporations, the danger of unnotarized legal documents, the tactics of manipulation disguised as concern. She taught them how to read a financial statement, how to secure their digital accounts, and, most importantly, how to recognize the subtle anomalies that often signal a larger fraud. She had taken the darkest chapter of her life and transformed it into a curriculum of empowerment. The pain of the betrayal had not vanished. It was a permanent entry on the balance sheet of her heart. But she had reconciled it. She had balanced the books. In the faces of the people in that room, she saw not just potential victims, but future auditors of their own lives, armed with the knowledge and the fortitude to protect themselves. Her personal battle was over, but her new work had just begun. The most painful ledgers are the ones that track the debts between a parent and a child. Eleanor walked into that bank ready to spring her trap, but the true cost of their conspiracy was tallied in the silence that followed the arrests. In the end, her most important signature wasn't the one that caught them, but the one that closed a chapter of her life and opened another, turning a story of profound betrayal into a lesson in fortitude. We hope Eleanor's story of resilience resonated with you here on my channel. It raises so many difficult questions about family, trust, and desperation. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Mark's manipulation by Chloe and Julian makes him a victim? Or was his complicity in the plot against his own mother unforgivable? Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next story. Stay tuned to find out what happens when a son, stripped of everything, must one day decide if forgiveness is a debt that can ever truly be repaid.